Something that mildly annoys me is when I go on Reddit and I see posts like how to recover your campaign after your players derail the plot. Because I think it's kind of antithetical to what tabletop role-playing games are all about. And that is the theme of this week's campaign diary. Hello everyone, my name is Tabletop Bro. Welcome back to the campaign diary. In case you're new here, this is when I tell you all about my Dungeon World campaign, what happened in it, and more importantly, what sort of decisions I made as the DM to make it happen. But first, quick programming note, today is my birthday, so if you want to be a total homie, you should totally subscribe to my channel if you aren't already, like this video, maybe even drop a comment. I don't know, ask anyone, I literally never do this, but I feel like this is the one time it's an excuse to do that at the beginning of a video. Anyways, a lot of stuff happened since the last campaign diary. Well, sort of. A lot of stuff happened in between sessions from the last campaign diary. In case you haven't seen it, which if you haven't, you should click right there. Last week, my friends and I ran our prologue adventure. It was really the session 0, but I wanted to run a little mini adventure for them to both kind of introduce them to the concepts of Dungeon World and how it plays, as well as kind of get their party where I wanted them. In hindsight, I probably should have said, you guys are Knights of the Realm, you're going to this town to investigate some stuff off the bat, but I kind of wanted there to be some feelings of choice involved, and I kind of wanted to nudge them in that direction. But whatever. Those are mistakes that I talk about in last week's video. Now, what I told my players at the end of the mini adventure last week was that there would be a 2-year time skip, and there's a couple of reasons for doing that. Mostly, I didn't want them fucking each other over. I wanted their characters to know each other, and you don't typically fuck people over that you've known for 2 years. And so I asked my players, think about what your character has done during this 2-year time skip. Now, my friend Mike, who plays Grog, the Boag Necromancer, which is like a frog person necromancer, he was super stoked. He shot me a text like 2 days after our session. He said, hey man, I'm super pumped. I can't wait to think about what sort of things Grog has gotten up to. And I was like, well, if you have time next week, let's totally run a little one-on-one mini adventure to figure out what happened. And my friend Nick, who plays Ishtar, the Tuskar Battlemaster, said kind of the same thing. In case you're not caught up, Tuskar are kind of like orcs. Battlemasters are like 4th edition Battlemasters. I do a whole video on all of these classes that the supplement Grimworld added. It's right there. Now, unfortunately, Nick didn't have time to do a one-on-one mini session as last week was his birthday and he was doing all sorts of stuff then. Fun fact, we're born 6 days apart, but Mike had time. So I wanted to run him through a little one-on-one mini adventure, like I said. And that one-on-one mini adventure would go on to completely derail whatever idea I had in my head for what would happen in this campaign, or at least the setup of it. So what happened? Well, it was a beautiful day in Darkhill. Actually, I think it was a really gloomy day in Darkhill. And Grog, the Boag Necromancer, was up to his normal day-to-day activities of collecting shinies from people's trash. He lives in a little ramshackle hut that is next to the pond in the park that is in the center of Darkhill. And when he came back on this one fateful day, he saw a couple of guards waiting for him. Now, he became a little bit familiar with the guards, and he knows them as Ratface and Big Guy, mostly because one is small with a rat face and the other is a big guy. And Ratface and Big Guy tell him that Countess Otilia wants to see him. He knows her as Pointy-Faced Lady. Now, Grog goes through the castle that's really more of a mansion, and he meets up with Otilia, who tells him that she's got a bit of a problem. You see, the county of the Argent Coast didn't always used to be owned by Otilia and her family. They're called House Greysword. In fact, a couple of generations ago, they were owned by an elven house called House Silverthorn. But the problem with the elves is that they are incredibly long-lived, and when you're incredibly long-lived, you kind of stop giving a shit about the people, which is definitely a problem when you are the head of a county in a very good aligned kingdom that seeks to help its people. So, Otilia's grandfather led a little bit of a revolution and became the Counts of the Argent Coast. That's the name of the county that they all play in. The only problem is that when the county of the Argent Coast was founded, or Argent Coast, whatever, the Silver Dragon Knight, who kind of heads up the entire kingdom, there's a lot of lore that's for another video, bestowed upon Count Silverthorn a shield, the Argent Shield, which was a symbol of legitimacy for the ruler of the Argent Coast. Now, when Otilia's grandfather took over from House Silverthorn, he kind of failed to get the shield. So Otilia asked our little frog necromancer to get it back for her. and she chose him because he's a very simple individual and probably wouldn't spread it around. Grog agrees to the quest because I had texted Mike the day prior and I said choose one of these 3 quests that you want to go on, and he chose steal the important artifact. Now, Otilia told him to meet up with her contact in Plaforcamoon. That's right, Plaforcamoon. Plaforcamoon is a little village that lies between Darkhill and Riverfire. Riverfire is the capital of House Silverthorn. She tells Grog to meet up with her contact, who is a halfling. In the Silver Kingdom and the Argent Coast, the primary denizens are humans and elves, so a halfling would be kinda rare. So Grog sets out, and he goes to Plaforcamoon. On the way, he makes a squirrel human centipede, or a squirrelipede, whatever, it's kind of gross, and he meets up with Gary the halfling, who owns the Gypsy Candle, which is the tavern in Plaforcamoon. The thing about Gary is that he kind of fucking talks like he's in Good Will Hunting, like he's from Boston. That's like his whole shtick. It's like one of the few voices I can do kind of consistently. And so he meets up with Gary. Along the way, he tries to kill one of the patrons in the bar to raise his corpse, and then he proceeds to gaslight the entire town into believing that he didn't try to do it. Whole lot of hijinks. Not really important because we're not even talking about the session with my friends, we're just talking about the one-on-one. Anyway, Grog and Gary go from Plaforcamoon to Riverfire, and the entire city was in mourning because the previous Baron Silverthorn died. Like, about a week ago. That's what's leading to this conflict. He died, his brother Beauregard took up the barony. Beauregard's pretty pissed that House Silverthorn no longer rules the Argent Coast, and so he's making all sorts of trouble. So Grog and Gary managed to make their way to the official funeral, and they managed to go into the castle in Riverfire and meet up with the Baron as Countess Otilia's official knight. Now, it turns out that the Baron isn't super happy with the presence of a Boag, and B, a representative of the Countess, because he believes he is the rightful count. She is a pretender. There's a whole lot of friction that goes on and a whole ass session that ensues of Grog trying to steal the shield, which he ends up doing. It's like a whole ass thing, but that little mini adventure isn't really the point of this campaign diary because it's just kind of sets up what happens later. Well, the story is he steals the shield, he kills a shitload of the Baron's guards, and ends up kind of starting a civil war within the Argent Coast. Now, as the DM, there was kind of a weird aspect to this because obviously Grog did earn experience through doing this little adventure, but I didn't want him to pull ahead from everyone else in the party, and I didn't want them to feel like they had missed out because they didn't do the mini adventure, while at the same time still rewarding Grog for all the things they went on the adventure. I didn't want to like nullify his XP. At one point in the adventure, he tried to cast a curse, and so to kind of balance things out, I made one of the requirements for him to cast it, for him to vaporize like all of his equipment, which sort of made things a little bit better. But I mean, the good news is that in Dungeon World, ultimately like level discrepancies don't matter as much as like Pathfinder or D&D or something like that. Leveling up in Dungeon World just gives you more options. It doesn't necessarily make you much better. I mean, obviously you do progress, you do get a little bit better, but it's not like overpowering. So thanks to Grog's actions, the entire Argent Coast, aka the setting of this game, has erupted into civil war. Now, my plan prior to this entire campaign starting was that the Argent Coast was going to be a very tame, docile place where not much went on. But alas, the plot that you think of in your head as a dungeon master doesn't really exist. That is not the story. The story is what your players do and what ends up happening. But wait a minute, Austin, you're already drawing conclusions? You haven't even talked about the session that all your players went on. You're goddamn right, because I don't know, I had something for this. Anyway, Nick ends up texting me this very long text message of what Ishtar has been up to in the past 2 years. Basically, Ishtar went on a bit of a retreat. Ishtar is a very spiritual person, and he kind of discovered that the humans and their gods aren't really excuse me. Anyways, he discovered that the humans and their gods aren't really like a thing, and that the elves are much closer to their gods. Now, him and Mike were talking about this outside of the game, and I only heard about this secondhand, which the fact that my players were talking about the game just makes me so fucking happy, dude. That's one of the things that Matt Colville talks about all the time, about how his players are always talking about the game. They have their lunches and stuff like that. I'm like, dude, I fucking want that. The fact that I'm getting that is just Just makes me feel good. Anyway, and so Mike's like, wait a minute, that's not going to work because I just pissed off all the elves. And Nick's like, well, maybe they'll lead to an interesting dynamic. And Nick was telling me this, and I was like, bro, there's different groups of elves. Like House Silverthorn, Ishtar would not get along with House Silverthorn at all. Because as Grog learned when he was in Riverfire, House Silverthorn is kind of made up of these like pompous, arrogant, spoiled, rich, snobby elves. Meanwhile, Ishtar is out with much more naturey, spiritual elves, so it can totally work out. This was another instance where I did want to reward participation. Obviously, Nick didn't play a whole ass session like Mike did, so I couldn't necessarily give experience, but I wanted to think of something. I mean, he wrote out a lot of stuff of what his character did, so, you know, I want to throw him a bone. Ultimately, I decided on giving him a little bit of an upgraded halberd. As a battle master, Ishtar already uses a halberd, and so I was looking through the tags, and I thought, what would be a good enough upgrade that it feels like a reward, but wouldn't necessarily be game breaking? And I thought +1 piercing would probably do that. Someone feel free to correct me in the comments, but the math doesn't feel too game breaking. +1 piercing just means that you get to avoid 1 bit of armor whenever you deal damage. It doesn't feel like game breaking, I don't know. So I ended up giving him that in exchange for his very long backstory about meeting with the elves and connecting with them spiritually. So we get to the actual session. I ask everyone what their characters were up to over the 2-year sabbatical, and Mike and Nick told Davis and Kirsten what their characters went up to. Then it went to their turn, and Davis told us all that his character, Mowgli, who's a little kobold druid, went off and returned to his homeland where he built a little treehouse and just kind of hung out for a year and a half. I definitely want to give him something for that, but it'll probably be a little bit further down the line, a few sessions later. I don't know, I have to think of something. Davis, if you're watching this, that was all a lie. I've known exactly this whole time what I'm gonna do. Kirsten, on the other hand, gave us this pretty cool backstory about how she was trying to hunt down the bear that killed her sister. Kirsten's playing a ranger named Tikani. Tikani is a Primordian, an ice Primordian, so she's like super icy and veiny or whatever, and kind of looks like an Inuit. So Kirsten tells us that for the past 2 years, Tikani went on the hunt for this massive bear that killed her sister. And I was like, you basically just described that you went on the pre-written adventure from Grimworld, The Grand Hunt. And she's like, holy shit, really? I'm like, that is literally a thing that exists where you hunt down this bear. She's like, that's awesome. Now there's an aspect of The Grand Hunt where the players can join the hunt, which is a guild. And so once again, want to reward players for creativity. I'm like, do you want to be a member of the hunt? And she's like, that sounds fucking sick. I read her out like some of the flavor text. She's like, that's dope. Tikani definitely became a member of the hunt. So that's all the stuff that happened prior to the session, both in real life and in the game. But what actually happened in the session? Well, if it was like a show like Critical Role, you would say not a lot. The plot didn't really advance all that much. Now, I didn't mind because I think we were all having a really fun time, but if it was something that we streamed, people would probably be pissed off and be like, literally nothing happened. I can already hear everyone clicking off. Stuff did happen, I promise you. Basically, the party all gathered back together in Dark Hill after a little bit of a 2-year reunion, and they met with Countess Otilia. Otilia explains that the war is not going great for House Greysword. Fact of the matter is that the lands that are controlled by House Greysword in the north of the Argent Coast are much poorer and have a smaller population than the lands controlled by House Silverthorn in the south. As a result, House Silverthorn is kind of steamrolling House Greysword in the war. Now, Otilia has dispatched the 3 other knights that she has to go and get the Duke, because she is the rightful ruler of the Argent Coast, and theoretically the Duke should help her put down this rebellion, but who knows how long that's going to take, and time is kind of running out. She then tells the players that there is this valley called the Shining Valley that lies between the lands of House Greysword and House Silverthorn, and nobody's really heard anything from them in like a generation. And she tells the players to go to this valley, to the twin towns, which are at the center of the valley. Now, the twin towns are the towns of Glimmerkeep and Whisperwillow, and they're not exactly on speaking terms. This is the pre-written adventure that they all agreed to play when we started this whole thing. She doesn't have that much more information to give the players. She just tells them to go to the twin towns in the Shining Valley, make contact with the leaders of Glimmerkeep and Whisperwillow as her official representatives. They are her knights after all, and get their allegiance in the war. Now, what I thought was kind of nice was that the players didn't ask what their reward for doing this quest would be, and so I ended up telling them, I was like, by the way, if you do this quest, you will have your very own keep. We'll build you a keep outside of Pleforkamoon. Love saying that. The players were all, of course, stoked. There's a village called Pleforkamoon, and Mike's like, bro, there's a village called Pleforkamoon. After getting the 411 from Otilia, the party then goes out into Dark Hill and they get their supplies. That's right, this session, a big portion of it was a shopping episode. They meet the blacksmith, his name is Silas, and at one point, Mike asks if Silas has a cat, to which Nick and I were both horrified because Mike is playing Grog the Necromancer, and I knew exactly what he wanted to do. In case you didn't know, I have a cat. She's adorable. She's sleeping right there now. Nick also has a cat. And he's like, okay, fine. An animal that nobody here has any connection to. So Silas ended up having a parrot. Grog was like, I'll buy your parrot. And, Silas was kind of hesitant. And then the parrot's like, take the deal, take the deal. And so then Grog buys the parrot, immediately kills it, and reanimates it. And finally, they went to the apothecary, which was really just kind of a GNC, a medieval GNC with a total gym bro halfling doing like curls. Ishtar finds out, he's like, do you have any health potions? And the halfling who worked at the place was like, well, they're not exactly fresh. And Ishtar's like, what does that mean? So I told Nick, I was like, what'll happen is you'll have to do a Defy Danger Constitution save. If you fail it, you'll shit your pants, but you'll get 6 health points back. If you succeed, you won't shit your pants, but you will roll a d6, and however much you roll is how much health you get back. So a little bit of a weakened potion. Ishtar ended up buying everything that he had. So now that they had been supplied, the party finally hit the road for Pleforkamoon. So I had them do the Undertake a Perilous Journey move. A, because I wanted to show it off, and B, I wanted to see if anything would happen. Mowgli was the scout, and he didn't roll great, so then I decided that there would be some form of encounter. And I wanted it to be a totally random encounter, and I wanted there to be an element of player agency in there. So I took this book out and I went to the dangers section. Perilous Wilds is a great book, and it has a bunch of random tables for things called discoveries and dangers, which are things that the party can encounter when they're out doing wilderness exploration. Now for the danger tables, it tells you to roll a d12 3 times. So like I said, I wanted there to be player agency, so I had Davis roll a d12 3 times. And the result was that the party would be fighting a cat, a lion, or a panther. So I kind of shelved this in the back of my mind. So the party encounters this burned out village on the way to Pleforkamoon. Immediately everyone thinks there's something up, because of course there's something up. Now, Grog had actually been here previously on his little 1v1, and that is where he found the squirrels to squirrel centipede. Mowgli is scouting ahead. He is shapeshifted into a bird, and he sees there is a soldier laying down on the ground with a drinking horn in one hand and a sword in the other, and homie looks passed the fuck out. But more importantly, the soldier is wearing the tabard of House Silverthorn. It's a black tabard with silver thorns on it. Incredibly creative, I know. So immediately they're all on edge. Takani decides to use her ranger abilities and takes her bear, whose name is Takani takes Nanook, her polar bear companion, with her, and they kind of flank around the village, and they go to the creek that separates this village in two. She asks, do I see any footprints? I'm like, you do see footprints. You see the footprints of like a squadron that have come to this village. And so immediately, everyone's on high alert when they hear that. So Takani starts investigating, expecting to see a bunch of Silverthorn soldiers, when all of a sudden a freaking panther jumps out of nowhere and just mauls the shit out of her, breaking her collarbone. Now, there actually isn't a panther stat block in the Dungeon World rulebook, so I did the quick monster creation to kind of come up with it, and I figured the panther would have the messy tag. So tearing her collarbone into pieces, well, that's pretty messy. So when the panther had attacked Takani, I had Kirsten roll hack and slash because I wanted to see if Takani would be able to defend herself in time at the panther jumping out. Now, if you're kind of unfamiliar with Dungeon World, this might be weird to you because she's getting attacked. Why is she making the roll? That's just kind of how Dungeon World works. There was an element of uncertainty. The panther was attacking her, but I didn't necessarily know if Takani would be able to defend herself, if the panther would do damage, whatever. Unfortunately for Kirsten, she rolled a 7, which is why Takani's collarbone got fucking mauled, but she did do her damage to the panther. The party rolls up and they see Takani is laying on the ground, bleeding out from her collarbone, and Nanook is keeping the panther busy. Now you might be thinking to yourself, well, wait a minute, shouldn't like Kirsten be making attack rolls for her polar bear to be attacking this thing? That doesn't make any sense. Welcome to Dungeon World, baby. I figured that in fiction it would make sense for Nanook to be defending, his master or her master, Tikani, from the panther, but probably not making enough progress to deal any sort of damage. And it also gives an excuse for the rest of the players to be able to catch up to do something. So immediately Mowgli turns into a white tiger and just tackles the panther into the creek or river or whatever. And Davis rolled I think an 8 or a 9. So he took a little bit of damage from the panther, and they're now both in the river coming down. Ishtar sees all of this and he's like, I have a bond with Tikani. Can I spend one of my gambit points? In case you're not caught up, Battle Masters have this whole gambit mechanic. If someone that they have a bond with, or if they take damage, they get a gambit point, which they can then spend. I had to tell him no, which I'm not a big fan of as a dungeon master, but it was one of those things where nobody had any idea what was going to happen as they were going into the situation. There was no way for Ishtar to know that a panther would fly out and attack Tikani. So I was like, holster it. You can't do it now. It just wouldn't make sense in the fiction. That's a big thing about Dungeon World. You have to think what makes sense within what is going on. You were basically playing a TV show, right? Now, Nick did look a little deflated by this. I think he was really excited to use the gambit mechanic. So I was like, okay, so Mowgli and the panther are going down the river. Ishtar, what do you do? And he's like, I'm going to run up to the river with my dagger and try to stab this panther. And I'm like, do you want to spend your gambit mechanic? Because you could say that this whole thing was all part of your plan. And immediately he was like, okay, that sounds dope. A big philosophy that I have as a DM that I've kind of come to adopt is let your players be good at things. There's a lot of stuff on Reddit like, oh, my player took this, and this. How can I counter it as a DM? And you don't really want to do that. You definitely want there to be a challenge, but when your players characters are good at something, let them be good at something. And he wanted to use his gambit mechanic really badly, which, I get it. And I was like, fuck it, I will make it happen, but I'll make it happen that makes sense within the fiction. Anyways, he stabs the shit out of the panther, and I think either him or Mowgli ends up killing the panther. And then they go and they skin the panther, and then they check up on the sleeping Silverthorn soldier. Kind of weird that this soldier hasn't reacted at all during this panther attack, right? So they go over, homie is just completely just not moving, just out cold. And so they start looting his pockets. And I think it's actually Tikani who then goes to loot his pocket, and you hear this the sounds of intestines falling when she tries to move his corpse. And so they flip him over, and his entire backside, homie was just completely disemboweled by the panther. So everyone's like, oh, that's gross, and kind of freaking out. It was a pretty cool moment. Now, something that I wanted to do was I didn't want Tikani being a member of the hunt to be kind of all for nothing, and I wanted to have a little bit of immediate payoff. So when they flipped him over, I was like, Tikani, you actually recognize this guy as he joined you on the hunt for the big bear, but you kind of recognize him as a douchebag who wasn't in it for the right reasons, and he ended up leaving. And she's like, oh, good, fuck this guy. Which is one of those things that I think ultimately, mechanically, it doesn't really lead to that many consequences, but it's just one of those small details that I think a player can appreciate when you use things from their backstory and what happened into the campaign session. I think that was English. You should try to do that. That's the moral of the story. So the party then looks through the village, and I'm like, this place has been razed for years. If there's anything good that you would have found, it is now gone. And they're like, okay, that's fair. So they continue on the way to Plaforcamoon. Now, another thing I wanted to do was emphasize the fact that there is a war going on. So as they're going to Plaforcamoon, I tell them that off in the distance, they see a field with a bunch of dead bodies. And immediately Nick kind of perks up and he's like, oh, there was a battle? And I was like, yes. And he's like, Ishtar's a battle master. I'm like, yes. And he's like, could I spout? I'm like, yes. And so he has this whole little thing. They investigate the battlefield to see what happened, which side won, how many people there were. And they figure out that ultimately House Greysword did win this battle. And then everyone in House Silverthorn fled to the woods. Mowgli then shapeshifted into a bird to, try and find the survivors. they had all been absolutely massacred, and it was like, God damn, this shit's intense. It was definitely something that didn't really have much effect on the overall plot, but it was definitely part of the story. You know, they got to learn that, damn, this war's crazy, brutal. House Greysword can be brutal, because like they slaughtered the fuck out of the surviving Silverthorns. And it's something that ended up taking up a lot of time. It's something that I didn't think the players would spend a lot of time on this, but the thing about playing tabletop role-playing games is if you throw something in front of your players, they will definitely investigate it. And it's something that irritates me when I see these posts of people being like, oh, they're not doing the plot. Like, motherfucker, the game that you are playing is the plot. Technically, if you want to be a fucking ass, the plot is, oh, they need to go win the allegiance of Glimmerkeep and Whisperwillow, but that's not true. Like, in the Lord of the Rings, the plot is, you know, Frodo supposed to destroy the One Ring in Mordor or whatever. Like, by that metric, the entirety of the Fellowship of the Ring movie doesn't matter, right? But everyone quotes the shit out of the Fellowship of the Ring. But what about Second Breakfast? Like, just because you're in some sort of prologue or you're adventuring to the thing or what the fuck ever doesn't mean that what the players are doing doesn't matter, especially if they're having fun. And maybe I just can't read people's emotions or whatever. It looked like my players were having a great time doing it. Stepping off my soapbox now. So then the players make it to Plaforkamoon. Everyone besides Grog meets Gary. Well, I mean, Grog also met up with Gary, but they had already met. And they see all the soldiers in the tavern. They end up meeting with the captain of the local regiment of soldiers. He's this guy named Vernon. This is actually a callback to our D&D campaign where their contact there was this guy named Vernon, had the exact same face and everything. I just ripped him off. It's Vernon Roach from the Witcher series, but I just put him into my own game. To quote Matt Colville, take the stuff that you like, put it into your game. And by that point, it was like 8:30. So for my friends who live on the East Coast, it was like 11:30. And I was like, this is probably going to be the best opportunity that we have to end the session right now before we get involved in other stuff. Do you guys want to end? And they're like, okay, yeah, sure. And everyone seemed to have a great time. At one point, Mike was like, yeah, nothing really happened this session, but next session's going to be dope. And I'm like, did everyone have fun this session? And they're like, yeah. And I'm like, then this session was dope. Who cares if the plot didn't advance? Because just like I said fucking 30 seconds ago, everything the party does is the plot, and it all contributes to the overall story. Everyone seems to be pretty excited. We are not playing the week that I'm publishing this, but we are playing again next week. Really look forward to updating you guys. Let me know how you felt about this campaign diary. Like I said, not much plot-wise happened, but everyone had a good time, and I think it was really important for setting up relationship dynamics, setting up things happening. And I really look forward to seeing what happened next. I can't think of anything else. You've probably clicked off. Thank you so much for watching.